Time is a peculiar and merciless force, moving forward like a perfectly disciplined soldier who never breaks formation, never slows his step, and never looks back, advancing endlessly regardless of who struggles to keep pace or who is left behind in the dust of memory. And for some, it feels as though time accelerates the more joy they experience, slipping through their fingers unnoticed as days blur into years. While for others trapped in discomfort, fear, or duty, it crawls so slowly it becomes unbearable, each second stretching like an eternity. Yet despite the difference in perception, time remains constant and indifferent, devouring youth, strength, and certainty with equal appetite. And although a human life of 70 or 80 years may feel long and significant to those living it, in the context of eternity, it is little more than a fleeting heartbeat, a momentary flicker of consciousness before vanishing into whatever follows, and mankind, aware of time's destructive power, has long attempted to understand it, measure it, and master it, inventing clocks, calendars, and complex theories to chart its movement. While philosophers and scientists alike have wrestled with its nature, questioning whether time is an illusion, a dimension, or a rigid law of the universe, and whether it might someday be bent, paused, reversed, or even escaped entirely. Yet despite centuries of intellectual pursuit and technological advancement, humanity remains powerless to control it, and time travel persists as a concept confined largely to imagination and speculative fiction, dismissed by most as impossible. And yet history contains unsettling whispers of rare moments when ordinary individuals, with no intention or understanding of what was happening, appear to step outside the familiar flow of time, crossing unseen boundaries into moments that did not belong to them, places where reality felt distorted, silent, and profoundly wrong. And these moments, often dismissed or forgotten, share eerie similarities across cultures and centuries, suggesting that time may not be as stable or absolute as we believe. And it was during one such inexplicable moment, hidden within the peaceful English countryside, that three teenage boys serving as British Royal Navy cadets unknowingly encountered something that would challenge everything they understood about reality, history, and the nature of time itself, for what began as a routine military training exercise, on a clear autumn morning would slowly unravel into an experience so unsettling and so deeply embedded in silence and absence that it would haunt them for decades. An experience involving a small village that seemed untouched by modern life, stripped of sound, movement, and people, a place that appeared to exist outside the present altogether, where time itself felt as though it had stopped marching forward. And although the boys could not have known at the moment, their footsteps across the rolling fields of Suffolk would soon carry them beyond the ordinary world and into a mystery that defied logic, science, and explanation. A mystery that would later be known as the Kersey Time Slip Incident. A story not of machines or portals, but of human witnesses who walked unknowingly into a fracture in reality and returned with questions that still remain unanswered. On a clear and crisp Sunday morning in October 1957, beneath a sky washed clean by autumn light, three 15-year-old British Royal Navy cadets set out across the rolling countryside of Suffolk with nothing more on their minds than completing a routine field exercise. For William Lang, Michael Crowley, and Ray Baker were new to military discipline and still learning the fundamentals of navigation, endurance, and obedience, having joined the Navy only weeks earlier in this particular weekend. Assignment was designed to test their ability to read maps, calculate bearings, and confirm locations using visible landmarks, a task as ordinary as it was necessary. And after spending the night sleeping on straw in a barn generously loaned by a patriotic local farmer, the cadets were instructed to follow a plotted route over several kilometers of open fields, hedgerows, and narrow country lanes, stopping periodically to make observations before returning to their petty officers with written reports. And the final checkpoint marked on their map was a small village called Kersey, a place none of the three boys had ever visited before, which made it ideal for training, as unfamiliar terrain forced reliance on navigation skills rather than memory. And as they walked, their boots brushing damp grass and fallen leaves. The mood was light, filled with casual jokes and youthful complaints, the kind that arise when young men march with heavy packs and empty stomachs. Yet despite the banter, their progress was careful and methodical, with Lang frequently checking their compass and map, while Crowley confirmed landmarks and Baker kept an eye on the time. And eventually, rising above the distant tree-line, they spotted what they had been expecting all along, the stone tower of Kersey's church, its bells ringing clearly across the countryside to announce the beginning of Sunday service, the sound echoing gently over fields and hedges, and reassured that they were on the correct bearing. The cadets adjusted their course and moved toward the village with renewed confidence. But as they entered a small wooded area at the outskirts of Kersey, something subtly unsettling occurred. For without warning or gradual fading, the sound of the church bells abruptly ceased, as though someone had reached into the air and silenced them in an instant, leaving behind a sudden and unnatural quiet that caused the boys to slow their pace and exchange uneasy glances. And although none of them could explain why the silence felt wrong, it pressed against their senses in a way that demanded attention. And continuing forward, they emerged from the trees onto a narrow lane leading down into the village, expecting to see parishioners walking toward the church or hear the distant murmur of voices. Yet there was nothing, no people, no movement, no sound beyond their own footsteps. And as they descended further, confusion turned to disbelief when they realized that despite having clearly seen the church tower from a distance only moments earlier, there was now no church in sight at all, no tower rising above rooftops, no stone structure anchoring the village. And Lang, who had military training and observation, later stated that the absence was unmistakable, as the area offered a clear field of view in all directions. And yet the landmark they had relied upon had seemingly vanished. And still, bound by discipline and curiosity, the cadets continued onward into Kersey, unaware that with every step they were moving deeper into a place that no longer obeyed the familiar rules of time, sound, and presence, a place that felt less like a village and more like a hollow echo of something long gone. As the three cadets moved deeper into the village of Kersey, the growing sense of unease settled heavily upon them. For what surrounded them bore little resemblance to any English village they knew in 1957. And with each step along the narrow, unpaved dirt lane, the absence of sound became more oppressive, as though the village itself was holding its breath, the road beneath their boots lacking even the familiar crunch of gravel. And when they looked around more carefully, they realized there were no cars parked along the roadside, no bicycles leaning against fences, and no tracks to suggest recent traffic of any kind. A strange detail in post-war England, where even the smallest villages showed signs of modern life, and the houses that lined the lane only deepened their confusion. For these were not brick or stone cottages with neat gardens and lace curtains, but crude, timber-framed structures with uneven walls, small glass panes, and roofs of thatch or wooden shingles, their design, appearing centuries old, as though lifted from a medieval illustration rather than a contemporary map. And Michael Crowley would later remark that it felt as though they had accidentally wandered onto the set of a historical film. Yet even that explanation failed to account for the overwhelming stillness that surrounded them, because there were no cameras, no workers, no signs of activity at all. As they paused to listen, they became acutely aware of what was missing, for there were no birds singing in the trees, no distant hum of wind through leaves, no dogs barking, no livestock calling out from fields, and even their own voices sounded strangely flat when they spoke, swallowed almost instantly by the air. And attempting to make sense of it, Ray Baker pointed out the ducks standing beside a shallow stream that cut through the village. But rather than providing comfort, the sight unsettled them further. For the ducks stood unnaturally still and silent, their heads unmoving, their bodies rigid, as though frozen in place. And when the cadets approached the small wooden bridge crossing the stream and stopped to drink and collect their thoughts, William Lang noticed something else that defied reason. For despite it being mid-autumn, with red and yellow leaves falling thickly in the fields they had just crossed, The trees within the village boundaries were fully green, lush, and alive with summer color, their leaves untouched by seasonal change. And yet even these trees did not sway or rustle, for there was not the slightest breath of wind. And above them the sky was an intense, almost unnatural blue, clear of clouds yet strangely oppressive. And it was in this moment of observation that Lang was struck by a powerful emotional response, a feeling of sadness and depression that seemed to emanate from the village itself, accompanied by an unshakable sense of unfriendliness, as though unseen eyes were watching their every movement from behind shuttering windows and tree lines. And he later admitted that the thought of knocking on one of the doors filled him with dread, for he could not imagine what might answer, if anything at all. And as they continued onward, they noticed that the area nearest the stream was sparsely populated with homes, each one separated by stretches of forest rather than clustered together as expected, reinforcing the impression that the village was incomplete or abandoned mid-existence. And yet despite this, nothing appeared damaged, decayed, or vandalized, an unsettling contradiction that only deepened their anxiety. And by this point, the cadets were no longer joking or chatting, their training forgotten as instinct took over, telling them that something about this place was profoundly wrong, that they had crossed into a village that existed beyond normal experience, a place where sound, movement, and even time itself seemed to have been stripped away, leaving behind only a hollow, silent shell that watched them in return, drawn forward by equal parts curiosity and unease. The three cadets continued along the dirt lane until they reached a small wooden bridge crossing the shallow stream. And directly opposite it stood what appeared to be the only commercial building in the entire village, a squat structure with an aged timber frame and a dull green door that immediately caught their attention, for unlike the surrounding houses, this building bore the unmistakable shape and placement of a shop. And as trained observers, the boys instinctively gravitated toward it, hoping it might provide some explanation for the unnatural emptiness that surrounded them. And approaching the front, they peered through the small, uneven glass panes set into the windows, glass so thick and imperfect that it distorted the view inside, another detail that felt distinctly out of place in modern England. And what they saw within sent a chill through them, for the interior was dark, filthy, and draped in thick cobwebs that suggested long neglect. And hanging from iron hooks were the skinned carcasses of oxen, three massive shapes suspended in mid-air, their flesh discolored and green with rot, unmistakably decomposing, filling the cramped space with the silent suggestion of decay. And it was immediately clear to the cadets that these animals had not been butchered recently, nor had anyone returned to tend to them, as if the shop's owner had vanished abruptly, abandoning both his work and his livelihood without explanation. And the sight was deeply unsettling, not only for its grotesque nature, but for what it implied, that life in this village had stopped suddenly and completely. And stepping back from the butcher's shop, the boys looked into the nearby houses through their uncovered windows, finding the same disturbing absence repeated again and again. For the rooms inside were entirely bare, with no furniture, no personal belongings, no tools, no signs of daily life, only crude whitewashed walls, empty floors, giving the impression that the villagers had either fled in haste or never truly existed in the first place. And Michael Crowley would later remark that the most unsettling aspect was how untouched everything appeared, because despite the apparent abandonment, there were no broken windows, no signs of looting or vandalism, and no evidence that children or outsiders had ever wandered through to leave their mark. A detail that made no sense given how close the village was to surrounding towns and roads. And adding to the impossibility of the scene was the complete lack of modern infrastructure, for the cadets saw no telephone poles, no electrical wires, no radio areas, no street lamps, nothing that would connect the village to the 20th century. And this realization pushed their anxiety to its breaking point, for the evidence before their eyes contradicted everything they knew about the era they lived in. And as the silence pressed in around them, broken only by the faint sound of their own breathing, the boys reached to share unspoken conclusion that they needed to leave immediately. And without further discussion, they quickened their pace down the remaining stretch of the lane, hearts pounding, senses heightened, as though the village itself might react to their presence. And as they climbed a small hill beyond the last houses, Ray Baker suddenly stopped and turned, his voice tight with disbelief as he pointed back toward the village. And there, rising above the rooftops, exactly where it should have been all along, stood the stone church tower they had earlier seen disappear, its bells once again ringing clearly through the countryside, accompanied by the sudden return of birdsong and the gentle rustle of wind through autumn leaves, and smoke now curled from several chimneys that had moments earlier stood cold and lifeless, as if the village had been instantly repopulated. And overwhelmed by shock and confusion, the cadets broke into a run, fleeing the hill and the village behind them, desperate to put distance between themselves and a place that had shown them a glimpse of something that should not have been possible, a place where time, sound, and life itself had vanished, and then returned as if nothing had happened at all. The three cadets did not stop running until the village of Kersey was well behind them, their boots striking the path in frantic rhythm, as if motion itself could restore normality. And when they finally slowed, breathless and shaken, the world around them appeared entirely ordinary once more. For the countryside had returned to its expected autumn state, leaves drifting in the breeze, birds calling from hedgerows, and the distant sound of church bells ringing steadily, as they should have all along. And yet, despite this return to normality, none of the boys could dismiss what they had seen, because the memory of that silent village clung to them with disturbing clarity. And though they exchanged hurried words, trying to make sense of it, no explanation felt adequate, and as trained cadets, they instinctively began to ground themselves in procedure, checking their bearings, confirming their position on the map, and noting the time, all of which aligned perfectly with where they were, supposed to be, as if nothing unusual had occurred. And when they eventually reported back to their petty officers and submitted their observation notes, the reaction was one of skepticism mixed with mild amusement. For the small hamlet of Kersey had been deliberately chosen for the exercise precisely because it was a known and easily verifiable location. And when the boys described dirt roads, medieval houses, an abandoned butcher shop, and the complete absence of people, their superiors simply laughed it off, concluding that the cadets must have misinterpreted what they saw or exaggerated their impressions due to fatigue or inexperience, and rather than investigate further, the officers dismissed the matter entirely, reminding the boys to focus on discipline and accuracy rather than imagination. And so, bound by hierarchy and youth, the cadets said no more, and as weeks turned into months and their naval training continued, the strange incident faded from open conversation. Yet it never truly left their minds, instead settling in a memory like an unresolved question that resurfaced during quiet moments. And for decades, the experience remained largely unspoken, carried silently by William Lang, Michael Crowley, and Ray Baker as they grew into adulthood, pursued careers, started families, and eventually went their separate ways. Yet even as time marched relentlessly forward, the memory of that silent village seemed immune to its erosion, remaining vivid and unsettling. And in 1988, more than 30 years after the incident, the past resurfaced unexpectedly when William Lang, now living in Australia, read a book on hauntings and apparitions by paranormal researcher Andrew Mackenzie, in which the author appealed to readers to come forward with accounts of unexplained experiences, and recognizing echoes of his own long-buried memory in the pages before him. Lang felt compelled to write a letter describing the events of that October morning in 1957, and before sending it, he contacted his old friend Michael Crowley, who had also immigrated to Australia. And though Crowley could not recall every detail with the same clarity, he immediately confirmed the strangeness of the village, vividly remembering the silence, the lack of modern technology, and the unsettling butcher shop, details that convinced Lang their experience had been real and shared. And when Mackenzie received Lang's letter, he was intrigued rather than dismissive, recognizing the account as a potential case of what researchers term retrocognition, or time slip, an experience in which individuals appear to witness a location as it existed in another era. And over the next 2 years, Lang and Mackenzie exchanged detailed correspondence, revisiting the incident step by step, while Mackenzie began an extensive investigation into the history of Kersey, consulting maps, archives, local libraries, and historians, and what he uncovered would gradually transform a dismissed training day oddity into one of the most compelling time-slip cases on record, suggesting that the cadets had not merely imagined a strange village, but may have briefly encountered Kersey as it existed centuries earlier, a conclusion that would raise unsettling questions about time, memory, and the unseen forces that may occasionally allow the past to bleed into the present. Andrew Mackenzie approached the account of the 3 former naval cadets not as a believer seeking confirmation, nor as a skeptic determined to debunk it, but as a disciplined researcher intent on uncovering verifiable truths buried within history. And as he examined William Lang's detailed recollections alongside the partial memories of Michael Crowley and the more fragmented testimony of Ray Baker, he was struck by the consistency of the core details, particularly those that would have been difficult for teenage boys in 1957 to invent or mistakenly agree upon. And his investigation soon led him deep into the documented past of the village of Kersey, where centuries of records revealed a place shaped by cycles of prosperity, catastrophe, and abandonment. And among the most compelling discoveries was the history of the building the cadets had described as a derelict butcher shop with rotting carcasses, a structure now known as Bridge House, which Mackenzie confirmed had indeed functioned as a butcher's premises long before the 20th century, with evidence suggesting continuous use as a butchery from at least the late 18th century and likely much earlier, supported by architectural features such as an attached slaughterhouse and its strategic placement beside the village stream, ideal for washing away animal blood and waste. And while the building was a private residence in 1957, records and oral histories revealed that its origins dated back to at least the 14th century, aligning disturbingly well with the cadets' description of medieval construction and abandoned interiors. And Mackenzie's research grew even more unsettling when he turned his attention to the vanished church. For St. Mary's Church, the central landmark of Kersey, had a construction history interrupted by one of the most devastating events in European history, the Black Death of 1348 to 1349, which wiped out an estimated half of the village's population. And historical documents suggested that during this period, construction on the church tower was halted, leaving it incomplete and partially obscured by surrounding trees, a detail that offered a plausible explanation for why the cadets saw the tower from a distance, yet found no visible church upon entering the village. And Mackenzie theorized that the boys may have witnessed Kersey as it appeared in the immediate aftermath of the plague, a time when survivors fled in terror, abandoning homes, livestock, and livelihoods in a desperate attempt to escape the disease, leaving behind a silent, empty settlement frozen in the wake of catastrophe. And this theory also provided context for the lack of human presence, the absence of furniture in homes, and the disturbing sight of rotting meat left untended in the butcher's shop, all consistent with a sudden and desperate evacuation. And yet, even as historical correlations mounted, Mackenzie acknowledged that the case resisted easy explanation. For while the 14th century certainly contained wind, birds, and the normal sounds of life, the cadets' repeated emphasis on absolute silence suggested something beyond a simple glimpse into the past, hinting instead at a moment where time itself had stalled, creating an unnatural stillness that did not belong to any era. And this contradiction became the central tension of Mackenzie's analysis, forcing him to consider whether the incident represented a pure time slip, a residual haunting, or something far stranger, perhaps an overlap of dimensions where fragments of history occasionally bleed into the present. And despite these uncertainties, Mackenzie remained convinced that the sincerity of the witnesses, combined with the historical accuracy of details they could not reasonably have known, demanded serious consideration rather than dismissal. And by the time he prepared his findings for publication, the Kersey incident had evolved from a curious anecdote into a compelling case study that, challenged conventional understandings of time, memory, and place, leaving readers with the unsettling possibility that certain locations, scarred by immense suffering, may retain echoes so powerful that they can momentarily pull the living into a suspended past, where history waits in silence for the next unwary traveler to cross its threshold. With all available evidence gathered and examined, the Kersey time slip incident remains suspended between explanation and mystery, a case that resists neat conclusions and instead forces us to confront the uncomfortable limits of human understanding. Because while Andrew Mackenzie's research strongly suggested that the three cadets had encountered the village as it existed in the distant past, possibly in the aftermath of the Black Death, there were still elements of their experience that defied both historical context and rational interpretation, most notably the profound and absolute silence that enveloped the village, a silence so complete that it seemed to erase not only human activity, but the natural processes of the world itself. For wind, birds, and animals existed long before modern civilization. And yet in Kersey, these fundamental sounds of life were absent, replaced by a stillness that felt artificial, deliberate, and deeply unsettling, leading some to speculate that the cadets had not simply traveled backward in time, but had crossed into a liminal state where time itself was paused, a place caught between moments rather than anchored to a specific year. And such speculation places the incident alongside other reported time-slip phenomena in England, including strange encounters at the Palace of Versailles and Bold Street in Liverpool, where witnesses have similarly described sudden shifts in environment, architecture, and atmosphere, often accompanied by feelings of disorientation, sadness, or dread. And while skeptics argue that such stories are the product of imagination, misperception, or shared delusion, the Kersey case remains unusually resilient to dismissal due to the consistency of testimony across decades and the historical accuracy of details that the witnesses could not have reasonably fabricated, and even alternative explanations, such as psychological suggestion or environmental factors, fail to fully account for the abrupt disappearance and reappearance of sound, the absence of modern infrastructure, and the precise alignment of architectural features with a specific historical period. And when viewed within the broader context of Suffolk's history, the incident becomes even more intriguing, for the region has long been associated with unusual and unexplained phenomena, from medieval legends and spectral sightings to reports of strange creatures and poltergeist activity, and more recently, the infamous Rendlesham Forest UFO incident of 1980, in which multiple military personnel reported encountering a structured craft under intelligent control near a Royal Air Force base, an event that, like Kersey, involved credible witnesses and resisted conventional explanation. And while it would be reckless to claim a direct connection between such disparate events, their shared geography invites speculation that certain landscapes, shaped by centuries of trauma, conflict, and human suffering, may possess qualities that make them more susceptible to anomalies, whether psychological, environmental, or something beyond current scientific frameworks. And ultimately, the story of the three cadets forces us to consider the possibility that time is not a perfectly sealed corridor through which we march in single file, but rather a complex and fragile structure with hidden intersections, moments where the past lingers close enough to be touched, and perhaps occasionally reached by those who stumble unknowingly into its path. And whether the cadets were unwary time travelers, witnesses to a residual imprint of history, or participants in a phenomenon that science has yet to name, their experience stands as a reminder that our understanding of reality is incomplete, and that beyond the boundaries of certainty lie vast regions of unanswered questions. And so the village of Kersey endures not merely as a picturesque medieval settlement, but as a symbol of time's unpredictability, a place where, on one quiet autumn morning, three ordinary boys stepped into a silence that did not belong to their world, and returned carrying a story that continues to challenge, unsettle, and inspire wonder, leaving us to ask whether time truly moves only forward, or whether, in rare and forgotten corners of the world, it sometimes waits.